Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I love this time of year in the garden. It has an unlikely combination between delicacy and energy. And that delicacy comes from the way that the plants are getting thinner, and what you're left with are spaces that the light can find. And the lower light that comes slanting across drifts through plants as though they're made of gauze. But along with that, there is the energy that comes from the purples and the oranges. And put these two things together, and for a few weeks, you have a really magical time. Coming up on today's show, Francis meets a man with a happy obsession for dahlias.
It's got to be neat, tight centre.
So it's got to be absolutely perfect.
Adam visits a slice of India nestled in the Gloucestershire countryside.
This is a bugle garden, and you can see that passion for India in the space.
And I'm getting a visit from Mark Gregory, who has created dozens of gold medal winning gardens at Chelsea, and he's going to be advising me on the water feature in my paradise garden. This is sad, but it's the end of my crop of peas for this year. This is a variety called Eddie that I sowed as a replacement batch. They went in June, and they've been fantastic. Really delighted with them. Now, there are still peas, so I'm not going to throw these away. I will go through picking off every single pod, and we will eat them with relish, but I need the ground because I do like to get garlic in the ground in September. And elephant garlic is what I want to put in today where the peas are. We were always taught that if you grew legumes, they were nitrogen fixing, and somehow that the soil would be full of nitrogen, which is why you grew brassicas after them. But actually, latest research seems to show that the plants use up most of the nitrogen that they take from the air. They actually leave very little behind in the soil. So if you want a bit of goodness, it's a good idea to add it, and I'm going to add some compost to this. Now, this is plenty. You don't need to put masses and masses of compost on. When I rake this out, this will be less than an inch over the whole area. The idea is to just top the soil up, just to give it a boost, a restart. And you don't need to dig it in either. That will work in perfectly well, process of worms and rain, taking the compost down into the ground. Now, I'm a big fan of elephant garlic. In fact, technically, elephant garlic is a leek, but it looks like a garlic, it smells like a garlic, and it tastes like a garlic, but it grows about 4 times as big as the next biggest garlic. And you'll see from the cloves here, each one is a whopper. And you will get 6, 7, or 8 cloves in a bulb. Now, although they're so big, elephant garlic is milder than almost all other garlic. And the technique for growing it is exactly the same as normal garlic, which is to grow it in rows, spaced about 9 inches apart, and to bury it so that it is at least an inch below the soil. And of course, just like normal garlic, you'll see that one end is pointy and the other end is flat. And that's the basal plate from which the roots grow. So the flat bit at the bottom, pointy bit up. What I shall do is just rake over it lightly to cover them over. And they will appear in about 3-4 weeks' time, and they're perfectly hardy. And they do need cold in order to form nice big bulbs ready for harvest round about the beginning of July. Right, I'll just label that. Don't need to do anything to those, just keep them weed-free. But I do need to start going through these to pick the peas. I should be keeping some of these for seed, and the rest we can eat fresh or freeze. Now, one of the features of British gardens is that even the smallest contains plants from all over the world. But Seasoncott, near Morton-in-Marsh, was based almost entirely on one country. It is a homage to India. And Adam went along to pay it a visit.
British gardens have long been influenced by plants and designs from across the globe. Deep in the Gloucestershire countryside is a house and garden that takes its inspiration from the architecture and spiritual traditions of one particular country, India. Built in the early 1800s, Seasoncott House is an extraordinary interpretation of classical Mughal design, with a graceful garden boasting grottos, a Hindu temple, and cascading spring-fed pools. I've come to meet Edward Peake to discover more about the history of the house and its fascinating gardens. His family bought Seasoncott in the 1940s. This place is absolutely stunning. The architecture's fantastic, the garden's beautiful. But you look at the history of this place and it's complex, isn't it?
Complex and unique, really. It was a family called Cockerell who'd been out in India in the 18th century who were responsible for it. They came up with this idea to recreate the Mughal architecture of northern India here in the Cotswolds. Their advisor and the kind of genius, really, behind the whole design was this artist called Thomas Daniel. Now, he'd been out in India for about 8 years at the end of the 18th century, and he'd done a whole series of beautiful pictures of Indian buildings, but he always surrounded them with these wonderfully sort of romantic landscapes. So here at Seasoncott, he's sort of recreated one of his pictures of India. So he came up with the design for the house, and he had a free hand in creating the garden which surrounded the house. So the fact that it faces east to the rising sun was very important. The whole garden on the north side of the house runs down a ravine with a spring at the top and then flows down the garden, sort of blessing it, as it were, with its water.
The house was completed in 1807 and Seasoncott remained in the Cockerell family for most of the 19th century. In 1944, the estate had fallen on hard times and was bought by Edward's grandfather, Sir Cyril Kleinvort.
It was still a wildly romantic place, but the garden was completely overgrown and the pools were all dried up. My mother tells stories of how she and her two sisters were sent out into the garden with scythes to cut down the grass to try and discover where the pools actually were. As a sort of advisor for the garden, they called in Graham Stuart Thomas, who was the great garden plantsman of the day.
And advisor to the National Trust at the time.
Absolutely. And he's added on his own personal touch. All the way down the stream, he's created these sinuously edged borders with his typical palette of plants, lots of stilbes, regersea, hostas, that kind of thing. And then in the sort of final flourish, my grandparents, after a visit to India in the 1960s, created the Paradise Garden here, with the canals and the Irish yews pretending to be cypresses.
Cypresses, yeah. The architecture of the house is often the starting point when designing a garden. And with such a distinctive building, creating a garden that reflects and complements its style is key. This is a Mughal garden that Edward's family have added, and you can see that passion for India in the space. Traditionally, Paradise Gardens have a rectangular layout, divided into 4 quadrants. Here, Irish yews have been worked through the space, creating a simple but beautiful symmetry that works against the sweeping curve of the Grand Orangery. Flowing water is another essential element. The long rills help set the geometry, with the central fountain creating the main focal point. But it works off the house as well, not only in lines, but the detail that sits up there in the balcony is repeated in the pool. This part of the garden really fascinates me. When you look at it, first of all, it could be a classical English scene, and I think that's because the planting's been added to over the years. But as a piece of design, to strip it right back, there probably was a real spiritual connotation to this when it was designed. It was put here because there's a natural spring that fills the pool and then disappears down the valley. But the temple there, which is the ode to the sun god, face east, so you can watch those beautiful sunrises. And the pool, it's the shape of a womb and that representation of life. And so many of those Mughal gardens carried those spiritual representations, which for me, it's quite a cool way to design a garden. For Edward and his family, Season Coat's ancestral connections with India are reflected in their own continuing relationship with the country.
We absolutely love India. There is so much that I treasure most about the Oriental tradition here at our home. It's kind of saturated with a sense of the kind of spiritual gardening of the East.
Have you got a special place in this garden that you just like to go and be, you know?
Well, if I had to choose one, it would be the Philosopher's Seat, as it's called, under the bridge. It's like a Mughal pleasure pavilion with water running underneath and the sunlight bouncing up onto the walls and views up and down the garden. What I find especially inspiring is the Mughal architecture that they've copied, combining the Islamic and the Hindu elements that made up the Mughal kingdom. The bridge is very much in Hindu in style. You know, the domes and the minarets are very Islamic in style. So the drawing together of those two things, combined with the fact that Mughal gardens were all about creating serene, peaceful places for spiritual contemplation. And it's just beautiful to see people enjoying the garden at that really deep level for which I think it was intended.
Season Coat is a garden I haven't visited, but I must get round to it. It's fascinating. And of course, I have a particular interest in Islamic and paradise gardens, having visited so many across the world. And I'm making one here at Longmeadow. It's very much in the idiom of the garden. It's not meant to be a show garden, but to blend in with other things we're doing. But there are key features that you have to have, and one of them is water. You must have moving water of some kind. And that has to be the next stage before we can progress. Now, I'm not an expert in water features like that, so I need help. And I've asked Mark Gregory, who has made many gold medal winning gardens at Chelsea, and last year designed and made the People's Choice Award, the Yorkshire Garden. So he is uniquely qualified to set me straight. I see you've made a friend, Mark.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah, very well.
Nice to see you.
You too.
Thanks for coming, because I really need some advice. Being a paradise garden, it has to have a water feature. There is no compromise on that. So there will be a square, because it needs to be a circular feature.
On a square.
On a square. That is absolutely essential.
Okay.
And what I'm thinking of is a dish, quite big,
Yeah.
gently bubbling, overflowing, so you can hear the splash.
Yeah.
And then obviously just recycling back.
Okay. Well, putting the choice of the vessel to one side, obviously you're going to need to have an underground, catchment area, for want of a better word. You can either make that, or you can buy a proprietary.
Well, we've got these here, which, I mean, I suspect is not nearly big enough.
This kind of system would be great if you had a very, very simple, small little rock with a little burble. That would be big enough for that. The type of thing you're looking for is you need something that will create volume of water.
Right.
So it needs to be probably, in your case, probably 4 feet square, 1.2 metres square. So basically, then you start with a submersible pump, hardwired in. Most pumps now come with at least 10 metres of cable, and on a feature like this is probably the most expensive part in actually getting the right pump, and actually getting a properly put in electric feed to it. Bearing in mind that the cable needs to be below your digging depth and armoured as well. And obviously then the connection by a professional electrician. And then I would say that depending on the volume of water, most people always tend to undersize the pump. So always get a little bit more than you think, because you can always turn it down. You can crank this thing down.
Is there an equation or a way of finding out what you think? Because you say get a bit more than you think. I'm thinking I want a bubble, I want it to overflow.
Yeah.
How do I work that out?
All the pumps that you buy in all the right aquatic centres, there'll be a flow chart, and it's basically about the head height. So they talk about head height. So that's the depth of from the pump to actually where the waterfall or where it breaks.
Yeah.
Pumps are designed to go 24 hours a day. Yeah. But I would say in your case that you should have it on a timer. So there's no point in going all night, and you'll increase the life of your pump.
Okay.
One of the things we always do as well would be to balance the water, because these pumps...
I don't know what you mean by balance.
Well, basically it's the pH. So in a lot of areas of the country, the water, tap water, is full of lime. Lime and pumps don't go together. You put a little bit of dry acid in and just to neutralise the water.
Okay, that's a good tip. So just to be clear, what you're saying is dig a pit that is the right size. Yeah. Line it with a wall of some sort.
What we would use, and what I recommend everybody use, is the butyl rubber.
Right. And then on top of the grating, presumably, I was thinking of putting brick.
As long as you've got gaps for the water to get back in. But obviously, you need to allow room for the trap to get to service your pump.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, pumps are designed to have a decent amount of water over them to work efficiently. Right. So if you're getting water that's excited, you're getting evaporation, you're getting splash, think about the possibility of putting a feed there, a top-up feed.
The fact we've got the water feed is we should use it.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't have the water feed, what could you do is build a bigger chamber, a deeper chamber, so there's more volume of water.
Brilliant. OK.
Best of luck.
I'm going to need it. That is a lot of really helpful, practical information from Mark. And I will be having a go at installing the water feature here in a few weeks' time. Now, I know what I've got to do. I'm certainly out of my comfort zone doing this sort of thing. But Frances is very much in her comfort zone in the sense that she's gone to visit an allotment, but it's not her own. This time, she's gone to Birmingham and to visit somebody who is not growing fruit and veg and herbs, but one very particular floral harvest.
When it comes to allotments, anything goes. At first glance, it may look like there's little method, but what I love is that there is always plenty of madness, with growers experimenting all over the place. Here, I'm told there's one allotment here whose plot really stands out. Brian Carter is a self-confessed dahlia lover. He's dedicated his whole plot to his highly prized blooms, which he's grown to show in competitions. Brian, 40 years of competitions. Have you ever missed a year?
No way. No way.
So what got you into growing for shows?
I went to a dahlia show and the colour was amazing. And I thought, we'll have a go at this. First year was a disaster.
Why?
I didn't know a great deal about them, but when I seen the standard they was growing, I just walked away and said, I'll be back. I started off with 25 plants. It snowballed up to something like 900.
Really? Wow. Well, I would love to find out what you need to do to grow prize-winning dahlias. Can I have a look?
Yes.
There are 14 classes of dahlia that can be shown in competition. But Brian likes a bit of razzmatazz. So he concentrates on pom-poms, cactus, decoratives, balls, and water lilies. But one thing's for sure, they must be in tip-top condition. So what are the judges looking for in an absolutely perfect flower?
It's got to be neat, tight centre.
OK.
That centre's gone. You can't show that, it's gone too far.
OK.
So but you see how it goes back?
OK.
Right to the stem.
So this one could potentially
get
selected?
That's not out yet, but when it does open, it's...
Oh, wow, so that's too early. That's too late.
Yeah.
So it's got to be
Yeah.
absolutely perfect.
It's got to look like that Saturday morning about 10 o'clock when the judges go round.
The judges expect to see a specified number of each cultivar looking perfect. So with this mini decorative, for instance, Brian needs to find 10 identical flowers. But there's some flecks of yellow in this. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad thing.
OK. And what about the size? Is that important?
Yes, it's got to go through the ring. See, that's gone over, but it's done.
What is this ring?
That's the National Dahlia Society approved ring, 115 mil.
And that's for a specific class of dahlia?
That's the miniature. Touches the ring, NIS, not a schedule.
Disqualified?
Yeah.
So why have they come up with this ring system?
It was stopping people growing oversized. Bigger isn't better. All about quality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a giant deck.
Is there a ring for that one?
No,
OK.
they don't make a ring now.
It would be a hula hoop. Over the decades, Brian has won 128 national medals, so the stakes this year are high. This is impressive, isn't it?
Amari Gold, giant deck.
It's lovely as well with the dark-leafed foliage, isn't it? The flowers stand out really nicely with that different colour leaf.
Yeah.
So do you think you'll have 3 for Friday?
No,
OK, so maybe this one won't be going in.
no.
We'll move on then,
Too
shall we?
late.
So is this one that you're a bit happier with?
Yes, Canora Valentine, full-size bloom, nice centre. It's always in the first 3.
I can see why. What category is this one?
Large deck.
OK.
Wherever I go, I take my large decks.
Is that your favourite ones?
Yeah, that's perfect.
OK. Do you think you'll have 3 of these for the show?
I hope so.
Dahlias grow from tubers beneath the ground which store all of their nutrients. Now, over the years, those tubers will bulk up and you'll end up with a very bushy plant with lots of smaller flowers. But Brian doesn't want small flowers for his shows, so he has a nifty trick. He'll take cuttings from those tubers in the spring and grow a single stem, and then he'll pinch out any side shoots, nurturing just this flower at the top, which means he'll have much bigger and much more refined blooms. Before a competition, Brian marks the best flowers with canes. Then it's time to take the plunge and prepare them for their journey to the show. So you're taking a nice long stem.
Yep. Of course, it's at an angle, right? It's to take water.
Oh, I see. So because it will sit like this on the
That's
bottom,
right, yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then what's the next stage?
Cane. Put the cane.
And is that just to keep the stem really secure and sturdy?
Yeah. Right, it's ready for crating. Push the knife in, below the water line. That's bled now. It's full of air. If I bleed, it'll last all week. But if I don't, 2 hours' time, it'll just collapse. That is secure now.
You can take the bends as fast as you like now.
Oh, yeah.
Brian has dedicated so much of his life to growing dahlias, and I'd love to know what spurs him on. Are you here every day?
Yeah. I have to be coming out. I have to be growing my dahlias. I enjoy it that much. Keeps me out of trouble. Go on.
Do you have a holiday ever?
I'm on holiday. Do the housework before I come out.
I have to say, there aren't many allotment plots in the country that look better than yours. Absolutely stunning.
You won't be surprised to learn that Brian did win a first prize at his show and the grand sum of £9 for his pains, but I guess he grows for love, not money. I was also very interested to learn that he'd had some problems, and that's slightly comforting because here at Longmeadow, it's been the worst year for dahlias ever. For example, round here, I've got David Howard in 10 different pots. Normally, by the middle of September, this would be an intense orange plethora of colour. And it's not there. There are buds there, and we've had a few, but they're really not performing as I might expect. That's the same for Rothsay Reveller, which is a dahlia dominating the orchard beds. Hardly any at all. Now, I suspect this is because of lack of water at the critical period in June and July when they were growing, and we just simply underestimated the effect of the heat of this summer. But if we're going to get more hot summers, we need to adapt the way we're growing. And I would be really interested to know if any of you have had a similar experience with your dahlias. If you have, or you've got any tips even, then go to our social media page, and if you've got pictures, so much the better, because we'd love to see them. I've had these trays soaking because I want to sow some thalictrum seeds. And it's often easier, particularly with a small seed, to sow them onto damp compost rather than sow them and then water them, because they skid about on the surface of the compost. Now, the reason I'm sowing the thalictrum is I love it. Thalictrum de Lavei is one of my favourite plants this time of year, tall with these baubles of mauve flower. And it has elegance, it has a sprightliness, and I'd love them to run right through the grass borders and the orchard beds. But to do that, I need about 50 plants, and the best way to grow thalictrum is from seed. And I've got some seed here. Now, in general, these will germinate best if you use fresh seed, i.e. collect your own. But obviously, if you don't have a plant to collect from, then you have to buy them. Now, I'm just going to scatter these thinly on top of the damp compost, trying to space them out if I possibly can. This idea of having masses and masses of the same plant, it's a really good way of getting a strong theme. And if you have one plant that dominates, you can then work all kinds of other things around it throughout different seasons. I'm going to cover these with a bit of grit, and that will hold them in place, because where you have seed that doesn't put down roots for quite a while, there is a real risk that they either get blown away or bashed about by heavy rain, and this will protect them. So, Thalictrum de Lavei. Now, I need to put this in a protected place, but outside, no extra heat. And I'm really going to protect it from heavy rain and snow as much as anything else. Cold is not a problem, and a little bit of damp isn't a problem. So I'm going to put it in a part of the cold frames. There'll be nothing to see until next spring, and then they will germinate. I can prick them out, and then they'll grow quite quickly, and so they'll be ready to plant out at the end of May, beginning of June. They will not flower in their first year. You have to wait until 2020 to see those flower. But it's well worth the wait, because I should have scores of fabulous plants for the cost of a few packets of seed. Now, that is planning for the future. But a plant that is doing its best right now, and in the most dramatic, exotic way possible, is the ginger. And you may think that ginger is something that is tropical and we only use in the kitchen and can't grow in the garden, but you'd be wrong. And Andrew Gaunt grows an awful lot of them, so we went to see him down in Chichester.
This is the National Collection of Ginger Lilies. Their Latin name is Hedychium, and they range from parts of China and Himalayas, right down through to the tropics of Malaysia and that part of the world. About 15 years ago, I really got interested, and it was just by chance. I went to a local nursery that had got one, and I was rather taken with the fragrance and the flower. It's a gardenia type, strong scent. It was an unusual plant. It's not something you come across day to day. And I thought they were so easy to look after that I bought one or two more and bought one or two more until I actually outgrew the garden, and now I've taken over a glass house, as you see here today. The collection is made up of 214 species and hybrids, and the aim of a national collection is to grow as many as that genus as possible. And what it is a living library. There are three types of flower. There is the shuttlecock, where the blooms are forcing upwards. There is a cone, where the blooms come out sideways sequentially. And then this more typical butterfly type ginger with this big cone of flower on there. Hedychium gingers are related to quite a few things that you might know. Zingiber, which is the edible ginger, cannas, and bananas, the musa, are all in the same Zingiberale family. When it comes to flowering, there are three stages mainly. They start flowering from the longest day onwards, which is the first flush. You then get a second flush in sort of September, late August, September. So things like the Thai spirit, which is a very tall one with a lovely large bottle brush orange flower on it. And we're now bringing back into cultivation one called rubrum, which is almost a red. There are only a few of those in the country currently. And then the later ones will come in October. So you can get a nice succession of flowers through the summer when a lot of the summer bedding is starting to fade. This one is Hedychium coccineum. It's a very good, hardy variety that produces a very nice, lush flower that can be grown easily in the UK gardens. To grow them, you plant the rhizome in the ground, you feed it with a general purpose fertiliser, a little bit of lime to provide the calcium, and the Epsom salts to provide the sulphate and the magnesium that the heavy crop requires. Hedychium almost have a natural insecticide, so nothing really touches them at all. The slugs don't touch them, and nothing disease-wise really affects them at all. It starts growing in about May time, and in August you get these lovely long orange flowers on there. What you do then is wait until the winter starts to arrive, wait until the frosts burn the leaves, and then you chop it off at ground level, and then I use a bit of wood chip over the top. That allows the rhizome to breathe, but protects it from the worst of the weather, and then you'll get a lovely crop in the following year. A lot of the early varieties, like this one, which is Unionensis, produce seed pods which are dark green, and then when they're ready, they literally explode open into this lovely colour of red and orange. You take the seed off, you dry it, so these seeds then are small and brown. You put them in a paper bag, keep them cool and dry for the winter period, and then sow them early in the spring when the light levels start to pick up again. The ginger lilies arrived in the Victorian times. They were brought back from our colonial countries and were grown in the heated glass houses of the Victorian era. After the World Wars, a lot of the gardeners died and weren't able to look after them, so they fell out of fashion. But now, with modern plant hunting, they've now found much more hardier varieties that will grow in our gardens today.
Come on. Good boy, good boy, good boy. feels like a bit of a gamble, but that has inspired me to try growing a ginger here in the Jewel Garden. I got this magnificent specimen, and this is a Hedychium densiflorum Assam orange, and it's supposed to be particularly hardy. So, in the ground, and good luck with you. Now, I think this will look well with the cannas and the dahlias and Nephrophia, and of course, the sock and grape banana behind. But what gingers really like and need is rich soil. Plenty of moisture, plenty of goodness, and good drainage. Let's try it. Ooh, got this amazing whiff of ginger. So let's tease it out the pot. There we go, look at that. There are the roots, you can see, look at them. Really fleshy roots. Pop that in the ground, like that. Being as gentle as we can. Right, I'll give that a drink. Enjoy it for the rest of the summer. And then, when there's the first bit of frost, when it starts to get really cold, I will cut this back, let it die back, and then mulch it thickly. And by thickly, I mean sort of a great mound. I'll probably put that much mulch over the top of it as an insulating layer to protect the roots. And if the roots are okay, then it will grow back next year. Still to come, Toby Buckland seeks inspiration from a sensational garden in Cheshire. But first, we go to Welshpool in Wales to join Nick at Powys Castle.
Welcome to Powys Castle. This magnificent stately home stands proudly above formal gardens, featuring bountiful herbaceous borders and spectacular yew hedges, which date back to the 17th century. Hedges are one of the most ignored, but arguably one of the most important features in our gardens. They provide privacy, screening, protection, a home for wildlife, and a fantastic backdrop to our borders. I'm meeting Edwin van Holsen. He's one of the gardeners who has the mammoth task of looking after the formal hedging here on the grounds. This, of course, is a yew hedge or a taxus, but there are other hedges you can tackle at this time of year.
Yeah, pretty well any sort of evergreen. Privet is a good one to do. Box if you haven't done your box yet.
OK. When some people tackle it at home, this nightmare scenario starts to happen. They start to cut deeper and deeper into here, and then it gets wider and wider and wider.
The more you stretch over, the more it goes out.
And that causes all sorts of problems for the hedge, doesn't it?
It does eventually. If it gets too wide, it might get snow on it. It'll collapse. Particularly sort of formal hedges, the sharp line will disappear.
Now, you've got a particular technique that you use here to keep this vertical.
This is your straight line on the floor.
So you've got a string line at the bottom, and so effectively, as you're cutting it, you're sort of looking down that orange string line to keep it...
I'm making the orange line appear in front of us.
So obviously this technique deals with the face of the hedge, but one of the things that's a real giveaway is the level of precision on top. Now, what do you do to ensure that?
It'll be a similar sort of principle, and we're going to go right across the top of that, but as it happens, I think one of my colleagues is on the other side.
Fantastic.
This is 1 year's growth on the yew. It only starts growing sort of beginning of the summer, and all of a sudden it'll put on 6, 8, 10 inches of growth.
So this cut now will essentially hold this all the way through to next summer?
Yeah.
Garden hedges are more than merely boundary plants. There's all sorts of things they can do to add to the design and structure of your garden. Now, this buxus here is working brilliantly. It almost sets this planting up as a raised bed, and it helps pin the planting and tie it back to the wall behind it. But it's also hiding a secret. Behind this hedge is a not very attractive concrete slab retaining wall. So it's disguising that, and it does far more than just a boundary hedge. Arguably, Powys's biggest highlight is the 14-metre-high top terrace hedge. Formal yew hedges were planted beside the castle in the 1680s, and by the end of that century, they're allowed to grow naturally and become more tree-like in structure and abstract in shape. In Victorian times, they were clipped back using only hand shears and balancing precariously on very long ladders. Nowadays, Dan Bull, one of the gardeners here, goes up in the air on a hydraulic cherry picker to complete all the high-level hedge cutting. Dan, this is quite literally at another level, isn't it?
Yeah, we're pretty high up here.
This hedge is so dense.
By cutting it every year, we're producing side growths, which is making it a lot denser.
So it just gets thicker and thicker.
Just thicker and thicker, yeah. There's some areas around here where we've actually cut holes to get the light to come in, and that the sparks buds off and we get the regrowth. Wow. The yew's great, it regenerates really well, so we cut back, you know, quite hard into it.
Yeah, and I mean, the amazing thing is, of course, we could fell this to the ground.
Yeah, and it'll come back up again.
It'll come again. Even though it's a man-made entity, the form of it sits so beautifully into the landscape.
Yeah, it just blends in, doesn't it? Even when it's all been cut, you know, from a distance, it does look like a rock face as well.
We're going to give it a go.
Yeah, shall we have a go?
Yeah.
All right, then. All righty. There you go.
Thank you.
Lean out.
So I'm going to try and just smooth that a bit. How's that?
There we go. Just a few thousand square feet more to go.
Hedges here are on a truly grand scale, but the techniques that are used to manage them can be applied absolutely anywhere. It's all about precision and timing. Get those both right, and you'll have a perfect hedge.
I last went to Powys Castle over 25 years ago. It is an extraordinary place, and I'd urge anybody who's not been there to go and have a look for yourselves. It's in there. Well done. You're so clever. I'm just placing these out because this is a new border, and it's hardly a border at all. It's a strip that we cleared under the hedge. The hedge wasn't doing very well. So cleared the grass, mulched it thickly, and that one improved the state of the hornbeam. And now it will cope with a little bit of competition from a few plants. However, the plants have to be well chosen because they may not cope with what the hedge is doing. So I'm starting off with these ferns. This is a polypodium. They are more or less evergreen because they stay green, if it's at all mild, all winter. And of course, that is going to help because most of the planting I'm doing in here is geared at spring. So we can just pop those along. I've dug up some primroses, which I can divide and spread. And primroses grow really well along the bottom of a hedge. In fact, they self-seed themselves along all the hedges here. And now is a perfectly good time to dig up clumps of primulas of any kind. Just break them apart like that. You've got the roots there, and then that will spread and form a new clump. And then the final plant I've got in is cyclamen. Now, I've got a tray here of cyclamen coum. This is actually a white version, but they're very often pink. The leaves are fully formed, and they've got this extraordinary glossy burgundy colour underneath and a sort of green on top. But the flowers won't appear until January, February, or even March, if it's cold. But really cold weather, snow and ice won't in any way harm them. And they're pretty tough, easy to grow. I've added plenty, not compost, but of leaf mould to this, because these are woodland plants. So I'm going to dot these around. Right, we're starting to get a natural feel of planting in a tricky place. And when you talk about natural planting, what you're really saying is it shouldn't look planted. It should look as though it's just happened there. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to start planting. I did say that this is a tricky spot. This is essentially dry shade, and it's quite difficult to get right because your range of plants is limited. And one of the best ways of getting information and inspiration is to go and visit gardens. Look and see what other people have done. You're just looking for ideas. It could be just 2 plant combinations that you hadn't thought of before and looks fantastic. And if you're lucky, you might get a nice cup of tea and a piece of cake too. And that's what Toby has done. I don't know if he got the tea and the cake, but I do know he went to visit a very nice garden in Cheshire.
I love visiting gardens. It's a chance to enjoy the fruits of other people's labour. And of course, it's a wonderful opportunity to hoover up good ideas for my own. And that's why I've come here, to the Cheshire Plains and Streatham Old Hall. It's a garden of rooms, each one themed and packed with summer colour and created with as much care and flair as the designs at the Chelsea Flower Show. The garden's like a living lesson on design. It's divided into rooms and each one has its own character, its own personality. But the clever thing is they're connected either by steps or paths or tantalising glimpses one into the next. What I like though is the garden's groove. It's all about rhythm and movement. These fastigiate hornbeams, like so many of the plants in the garden, are planted symmetrically, but yet at their base there's sort of amorphous naturalistic planting and huge pools of the same thing. And then there's the water, connecting the different areas together. Now up close, the garden doesn't disappoint either because the attention to detail, well, it's remarkable. I mean, here, you got that wintered bracken-coloured brickwork chiming in with the carex and the leathery leaves of heuchera. Clearly, this is the work of a designer at the top of their game. To find out more about how the garden evolved, I'm meeting the owner, architectural designer and self-taught garden designer, Ken Roscoe. Ken, your garden is fabulous.
Thank you.
You have a kind of innate understanding of space. Would you say that's true?
That's very kind. To me, I find that the easy part. The hard part for me in the garden was understanding each of the plants and how this is not a static space. In building a house or an interior, it's done. Day one, it's static.
Did you expect it to be?
I did, if I'm truly honest, but I've enjoyed the challenge of how it's evolved and how it builds and builds.
So tell me about the garden rooms.
We like to play with scale and form, and the Rill gardens, which started from the smallest of plot sizes through to the size of the garden I grew up in. 3 bedrooms, semi-detached house, very long, narrow garden, and then into the kitchen garden. So here we are on the main terrace, and so bringing in the oversized pots with the olives, they make a larger space feel more intimate.
It has a real, well, a feeling that it's been here for a long time. How did you achieve that?
You have to have something that grounds the garden. And so we reused paving from the original driveway, things like the doors into the kitchen garden. We found them in a reclamation yard, imported from India. We actually built the wall around the door. And so having the pieces that have real heart to them, that's what I think grounds the garden.
Okay, I'm going to nip off and breathe in some of the magic, but it really is glorious. Thanks for having us.
Enjoy.
Aren't these late season flowers just lovely? That's partly because at this time of year there's a lot of dust in the atmosphere, and that makes the sunlight look red, so it picks up the orange centres of echinacea and the noses of helenium and bright red crocosmia. It makes them almost seem iridescent and glow. The lesson here, though, is about perspective. Now, most of us plant our borders so they look good side on. However, if you change the perspective, that changes everything. Viewed from the end, it's as full as a florist's bucket. Sometimes in gardening, less is more. And this vision of green is made up of just 3 plants. The top layer is Dicksonia antarctica, or tree ferns. It gives an exotic vibe. And then there's bold as a box that adds solidity to the ground level. And in between them is a roiling mass of Hacknacloa grass that looks like a green sea, particularly when it moves around in the breeze. Just lovely. I like this because this could be scaled right down to that difficult to plant dark bit at the bottom of your garden, but they look good for such a long time through the year. The terrace, I think, is my favourite part of the garden because it has such personality and a long season of interest. And that's largely thanks to these tapestry borders that run down the side of the path. Especially silver thyme with black Ophiopogon grass, lovely tactile stachys and sanguisorba. And it's clever because it's weatherproof. In a sunny year, the thyme and the silver stachys will really thrive. And in wetter years, well, the Ophiopogon will really like that. And then there's the pots. Have you ever had the feeling that you've been downsized? And never mind 10 years younger, I feel about 10 years old stood next to this. It's just wonderfully playful. You could copy this idea with perhaps a plastic container, something made of wood, homespun, but by supersizing, you create a piece of living sculpture. Now, olives are wonderful container trees because, well, you can forget to water them a couple of times and they won't die off. They're very robust. But it's this St. Peter's Port daisy that really makes it. It's called Erigeron carvinskianus. It's just a lovely thing. I've got it in my garden, and you know, it's in flower and looking good all year round. This is a garden that is obviously easy on the eye. And although it's on a grand scale and it's packed with plants, it's also packed with really good ideas for gardens both big and small.
I really like those giant pots with the olives in them. I think these are pretty big and I'm very happy with them, but wouldn't they be fantastic if they were twice as big? And what's interesting about that is that they were used to make a big area seem more intimate, but you can work it the other way. If you've got a small garden, think about putting in a really big pot, or even a couple if you've got room. And although that might seem counterintuitive, in fact, it makes a small space seem bigger. A few chosen large objects or plants will actually expand the space rather than constrict it. And what I've been doing here is just tweaking these, just taking off anything that's just sticking out slightly, because it's all part of the process we've tried to do across the whole garden over the last week, which is to cut hedges, cut edges, cut entrances and exits to give it crispness to the general way that the garden inevitably at this time of year is fading and thinning out. That gives it another energy and keeps it looking good for an extra few weeks. Okay, And there's one tip. Here are some jobs to get on with this weekend. Thank you. Come on. If you grow large, vigorous brassicas like purple sprouting broccoli or Brussels sprouts, they will need supporting before winter kicks in. Use good strong canes or stakes and drive them in firmly, and then tie them securely. That way, they'll be able to withstand the worst of the winter weather. You can make your own turf for lawn repair very simply. Take a seed tray, fill it with compost, and then sprinkle over some grass seed, pressing it down so there is really good contact with the compost. Cover that lightly and put it somewhere sheltered. Keep it well watered, and the grass will germinate and sprout very quickly, and then you can use it to repair worn patches. Now is a good time to plant out biennials such as these foxgloves where you want them to grow next year. You can either buy young plants or, as I've done, redistribute self-seeded ones where you want them to flower. Plant them now and the roots will go on growing until the weather gets cold, so you'll have nice, strong plants for next year. I'm assembling a very rough and ready pair of bays for our shredding material. This is what goes on behind the scenes. And what we try and do here is recycle everything. Use everything we can. So this is for all the prunings, whether they be cutting back trees, hedge trimmings, not anything really spiky. That gets burnt and then the ash put on the compost heap. This bay here is intended for leaves. We've dumped prunings in there for the moment. But the idea is that we have all that sort of material in here, and then when it's completely full, we shred it and put it into there. And it takes about 4 bays to fill one of these bays. And it can stay there all winter, and then in the spring, we can either use it as a mulch, because it will have rotted down enough, or we can use it for paths, which are very good in the vegetable garden, straight. As soon as we shred it, it goes down on the path, and that works well too. Now, these pallets are from a builder's merchant. They're a mixed bag, they're not the same, they don't look very fancy, but they do the job very well indeed. And you just can bang a post in, you can tie them together with string or wire, you can screw them, you can nail them. But as long as it does the job for a few years, they work well, and you're recycling all that you can. Okay, I've got a bit more to do, and I'll be busy, but I'll see you next week back here at Longmeadow. Till then, bye-bye. Okay, let's make sure that is in line with that.